It's not a red pepper yet. How do I make it a red pepper? Non-destructively, I use an adjustment layer. And I'd like you to make 2 additional peppers and change them 2 different ways. So for example, this might be hue, saturation, and brightness. And I could just change the hue of that to something, oh, that's a really nice looking pepper. Now it's changed absolutely everything to be more red. So what I can do is put this hue saturation and this red pepper, hold the shift key to select both of those, right click and group them, group from layers, or I can Command G, group them. I'll call this group red pepper, and take this mask and move it up to the red pepper group so that it applies to the red pepper and the hue saturation adjustment layer. Now there's one little problem, and this really bothers me, and that is that the stem of a pepper is always about the same shade of green, regardless of the pepper color. So you could Alt drag this back onto the pepper, and then for the hue and saturation, I'll just drag that and replace that. On the mask, see I have my mask selected. I'm going to turn that off for a minute. No, I'll leave it on. I'm going to take my quick select tool and select that stem. And actually, okay if I go a little wider here, as long as I don't select that pepper. Because what I want to do is on that mask, I'll click on this and look actually at the mask. Take my paintbrush and let's go 100% on that. Paint that in black so that the stem of the pepper remains pepper stem colored, and that moves. If I do this, yeah, it still moves. So what I need to do is hold both of these and right click and link layers so that the hue and saturation and the red pepper layers always stay together. I need one more, and I could do that by right click on this, duplicate the group, and call this green pepper. But for the green pepper, I don't want to use the same adjustment layer. To get that same selection, Command or Control on the PC, click on the thumbnail to regain that selection, and then find some other color change method. And we looked at a few of those on DL6A, so you should have some experience with that. You could selective color, use color lookup, the channel mixer, color balance, curves. You'll do curves. Okay, it's yellow. Red layer. Green layer. Blue layer, it's too yellow. It's too blue. Try around there. And on the RGB, I want to make the whole thing darker. So that's adjusting the gray values of all of the channels. And that's not bad. Again, you can play around with that some more. Okay, so on layers, that's one way of doing a green pepper. I'll turn that off. Once again, I'll Command click on the mask and try something else, solid color. You could try solid color. Find a green that you think a green pepper ought to be, and then change the blending mode. Just put this on multiply, and I'm not sure how well this works on the Mac. I think it does. On a PC, once I have multiply selected, I can use the arrows on the keyboard to cycle through the different blending modes to see if I see something that makes the color the way I want it. And possibly vivid light, but maybe reduce the opacity and the fill a little bit. And maybe not the fill. Reduce the opacity to see if I get a natural looking pepper. Possibly the linear light. Again, just go through them and see which ones give you hue, perhaps not. And here, since I did this as a color adjustment layer, I can go back and change the color of this thing anytime I want to. I'm thinking linear light was pretty good. Possibly hard light. Okay, so give me a red pepper and a green pepper, or you can do an orange pepper. I like the orange peppers too. And then make sure that the adjustment layers that go with that pepper are linked to the pepper, so that when you move the pepper, you don't move it without the mask. And again, I think I want the red one in front of the green one, so I'll just drag this up above that. Again, I might want to Command T transform and change something about this, so again, it doesn't look like it's all the same pepper. Distort. And you notice, as long as I have them all selected or they're linked together, the masks and the adjustment layers will change with the object. So 3 down. Olives. The olives are the one object on here that are not going to be easy to make into something in perspective. I can tell you how. I don't think you should spend the time on it unless you really just want the experience, but you could, again, make sure I'm on my base layer. Command C, copy this, Command V, paste. Move it up over here somewhere. Just sit it out there for a minute. And you might have to do this in 2 pieces. I'll make a duplicate of this. Call this olives. Call this olives 2. I'm going to turn that one off. Command T transform. You could right click on this perspective and actually make it seem like it might be sort of in perspective. And the difference is that an ellipse in perspective is no longer an ellipse because it ends up being different kinds of curved, or paint cans or light reflectors or other things in perspective. It's never a perfect ellipse. It has to be drawn in such a way that reflects how it's actually going back in perspective. Right click on this free transform and actually shorten this a little. I have to hold the shift key to get it to go down that way. Okay, so there's like an olive plate in perspective, but the olives don't look quite right. So that's when you bring in the other olives and do a quick select on some of these olives. Well, that didn't work. Magic wand tool, perhaps. Just want to quickly grab some olives. Like the way that works. Magic wand tool, or magnetic lasso, perhaps. Pretty sloppy, so I'm going to use my other lasso tool and just kind of add some curves back into here. Again, this won't be perfect, but I'll mask that, mask this layer, fill that with my foreground color. And the way I do that is Alt or Option and the backspace key or the delete key on a Mac that is on the top of your keyboard, not the other delete key. Okay, that's a little fuzzy looking. Then turn this back on and I'll just move these guys up here a little bit. And maybe it'll seem like it's actually in perspective. Not really. It's not a really great solution. If I Command T, transform my base layer and flip that horizontally. And from a distance, maybe it might appear that it's in perspective. Fortunately, it's not a main element here. I'm turn the background off. I want to select this white rectangle, perspective white rectangle, and this background stuff. Get everything else that I don't want on that layer. Mostly, I just don't like to have big holes in my masks. The only thing that should be clear on the mask is what's actually showing through. Command Option R, apply that same selection setting and feathering, and then add a mask to that. And I see I forgot to reverse that, so Command I to invert the mask. I'll turn this back on. Okay, so I wanted to keep these olives together. I'll right click on that and link layers so I can now move those around. Let's turn this back on. I want that here somewhere. Tomatoes. I like tomatoes just as much as I like peppers, so I want 3 tomatoes. Going back to my base art, rectangular selection, Command C, copy, Command V, paste. Tomatoes are going to be around here. And they're going to be in front of the peppers, so I better move them up to the top here above the peppers. Okay, you could use a round selection on this, an elliptical selection, but tomatoes aren't perfectly round usually. So you could use the quick select tool and get a quick select of that tomato. I'm going to do that again so you just see how efficient that is if you've got a fairly contiguous set of similar colors for an object. There, it's selected. Command D one more time. I haven't let go yet. Notice that it's roughly in the vicinity of the edges. When I let go, it finds the edge. Command Option R, same edge shift and feather. Okay, and make a mask. Now, it looks a little soft to me. I'm going to go back in there again, Command Option R. Change this to a 1 pixel feather and shift the edge just a little bit farther to make sure I don't get any white of the background at the edge of the feather. See, how's that look? Well, it'll look okay if I had actually Command Shift I, inverted that selection, and foreground color is black. Alt or Option click on the backspace or the keyboard delete key, and that should bring it in enough that it won't look like I've got a halo around it or that it's been cut out. It still looks a little soft on the edge. It'll be okay. What you don't want, I'll give you a good example of a really bad halo. Command Option R, put the edge back to 0 and give it a 3 pixel feather. Control or Command backspace or delete with, they'll give me the background color filled into what is selected. Command D. Okay, now you can see that I'm definitely getting a white halo on the edge there. So that's why when you have a feather, you may want to shift the edge inward a little bit to make sure it doesn't feather out to something from the original image that will show. And a tomato on a white background, that white is going to show. Here in my history palette, I'm going to go back to this one because I think that's the one that looked okay. It's not bad. Okay, so I have 1 tomato. I want 3 tomatoes. And again, I'll call this tomato. And make 2 duplicates of it. Right click, duplicate layer. Okay, so I have 3 tomatoes. Let me move these around for you. Again, I have auto select, so if I click right on that tomato, okay, there's 3 tomatoes kind of randomly placed. I like them in a neat little row, just like my peppers. If you select more than 1 layer, you will get alignment tools in your control panel at the top. I select all three of these and align them this way, and I should get distribution here in the options, distribution, and I can distribute them based on their centers so they're all evenly spaced. And I like my tomatoes to just look like they're marching in single file. So there are my tomatoes. I think maybe I'm going to select this one and move it over just a little bit more, and then select them again, and again distribute based on centers and align that way. I think that's good. I like the tomatoes that way. Now, the tomatoes are the one set of objects that I would like to see a realistic shadow on. And I have a lot of students that immediately go and find the drop shadow tool and put a drop shadow on it. The drop shadow, unless you put a lot of other effort into it, doing modifications to it, the drop shadow will always make something look like it is a cutout flat object floating against a flat wall. What I want here is a shadow that's going to look like these are sitting on a surface, much like this pepper is sitting on a surface. So I'm looking for a shadow that goes over this way and is kind of soft. How do I do that? Well, the way I do it, since a tomato is something that's round, that makes it actually fairly simple to make a reasonable shadow for it. I'm going to command click on one tomato's mask, command shift click and click on the next tomato's mask thumbnail, and command shift and click on the next tomato's mask thumbnail. So I now have three selections here. I want to add a layer that will be where the shadow goes, and that can be in front for now. Now I have to guess at how soft I want that. I can always make it softer or sharper later using blur or sharpen filters. But for now, I'm going to guesstimate that I want shift function key 6, a feather of, I'm going to try 20 pixels. Again, I'm just guessing because I can't remember what I used the last time I did this demo. And then I need to fill that with a color that will make a good shadow on this green of the cutting board, because we're going to enlarge that cutting board and put it into perspective. And I want the tomatoes to look like they are just naturally sitting on that cutting board with a natural shadow. The shadow should be the complement of that green. We talked about the color wheel and complements before, and we're going to use that now to determine a correct shadow color for the tomatoes. I'll take my eyedropper and sample this green, double click on the swatch on the tool panel to get my color picker, and I see that the hue of this, the absolute pure color of this, is 69 degrees on the color wheel. The true complement of it is exactly opposite it on the color wheel, which means it's 180 degrees apart. So if I add 180 to 69, I should get 249. So this is the true complement of 69 degrees on the color wheel. So with this feathered, and that feather was 20 pixels, I'm going to fill with the foreground color, and you can shift function key 5, change this to foreground color, or you can under edit, find fill. It says it's shift function key 5, but when I'm doing this kind of work, it's faster to just hit Alt or Option Delete on the keyboard to fill with the foreground color. So there's the beginning of my shadow. To be a shadow, I have to change the blending mode from normal to multiply. And then if I don't want a really heavy shadow because it's not a really strong contrast light situation, there's ambient light reflecting into the shadow, I can reduce the opacity of that to maybe 50, 60%, and then set that behind the tomatoes. Command T transform the shadow, and I tell you, they made a change in how this works. It used to be if you grabbed a corner or any part of this, it scaled in one direction. They now changed it so if you hold the shift key, you can change it in any direction. But if you don't hold the shift key, it constrains, it scales uniformity. So while in all of the other programs, all of the other tools you're using, when you want to constrain, you hold the shift key. In Photoshop, when you have a selection, you hold the shift key when you do not want to constrain. I didn't design this. I'm not sure why they decided to do that. I'm going to escape that and start over. Command T transform, hold the shift key to not constrain, only in Photoshop, and flatten that down some. If I think it needs a little perspective help because it's going to be on a perspective cutting board, I can change to the perspective transformation and maybe give it a little that way. And then because that stretches them out more than the tomatoes are spread out, I'll go back to free transform, hold the shift key to not constrain, and move this back in a little. Try to get my shadow consistent relative to where my tomatoes are and move it up to someplace like this. Let me just close that, see if that looks sort of like the way the shadow occurs on those peppers. If you want to add shadows for the peppers, go ahead and add shadows for the peppers. I just want a set of shadows for the tomatoes as practice for doing shadows. Shadows will be important in 6B, and I'll hit the return key to accept that. On my layer palette, I'm going to have to take my shadows and my 3 tomatoes and Command G, put them into a group, or from the pull down, new group from layers, call this tomato group, and make sure that these are linked. It used to be if you put them in a group, the group would always move together, but the current version, you have to link them if you want them to move together. There are my tomatoes. Command T, perhaps my tomatoes should be a little bigger.